Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 33, The Major Disagreement, Pure Positive versus Balanced Training. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast. My name is Mariano, that's Brent. We want to thank you guys so much for listening, and I do want to let you know that you can find us on all major social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, all by searching Dog Trainers Podcast. It's all one word, it's at Dog Trainers Podcast, as well as all major podcast platforms, right? Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, and all that good stuff. Now, we also want to give a shout out to some cities that have been giving us some love lately. So what's up to Atlanta, Georgia, Kensington, New York, Lake Stevens, Washington, and Flagstaff, Arizona. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate how receptive you've been to our content, and we're going to do our best to keep pumping out some good stuff for you. So this here is episode 33, The Major Disagreement Between Pure Positive Trainers and Balanced Dog Trainers. And Brent and I have noticed, we've always kind of been aware of this, and this was one of the biggest motivators for starting this podcast, was there can be a lot of heated disagreement in the two camps of training, right? And, you know, I know that everybody's got their points and a lot of them are valid. And we just wanted to start this as a way to have these conversations, minus all the negativity and all the craziness, to figure out and get to the bottom of what actually helps dogs. And so before we dive right in, I just wanted to give a quick invitation to our listeners, because you guys have been really great lately about just giving us feedback, you know, messaging us or otherwise emailing us. Do us this favor. Brent and I do reach out to a lot of trainers. You know, there are a lot of guests who you haven't heard from on DTP who we have reached out to. And it's either because they're busy, you know, some haven't gotten back to us, some have and just didn't want to be on. And we're not here to name any names or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But help us out with this if you could. If there's a pure positive trainer out there who would be interested in talking to us, not arguing, just talking to us, you know, having a very civil conversation about these different, you know, methodologies and where we agree and where we disagree, because this would be helpful. Please reach out to them on our behalf. Let us know, or just send us a message of who they are and we can reach out to them. But we really want to have these conversations, and I'm going to let Brent dive into that a little further. So over to you, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for throwing that over to me. As Mariano was saying, guys, the whole purpose of this podcast is to kind of create this forum of information where we can choose, you know, we can choose what we want to add to our repertoire and our toolbox. You know, me being a dog trainer for a while, you know, even myself, I've gone through a lot of different evolutions and, you know, the different pendulum swings where, you know, I focused more on the, you know, more maybe like a pressure side. And then I focused more on a food side, and I focused more on a motivation side. And so, you know, I'm no way, even though I've been doing this for a while, and there's many trainers who've been doing this twice as long as me, 3 times as long as me. They're very experienced, but they will always tell you that we are still students. And what we're always trying to do is we're trying to find out what is the type of dog training that we want to identify ourselves with, right? But there still happens to be these polarized camps, right? Pure positive versus balanced dog training. Now, in some of our other episodes that we had with like Tyler Muto and you know, Tommy Davis and Michael Ellis, you know, we talked about that the balanced dog training spectrum, in essence, is actually a very broad spectrum, right? We would even say that, you know, other old school methodologies of dog training have actually now fallen into the balanced training camp, because, you know, even if you've been working with no pressure for the last 40 years, I'm sure definitely by now you probably use a couple treats here and there, and that might, in your opinion, qualify you enough to call yourself a balanced dog trainer, right? So we're gonna get into some of these arguments, because I was talking to Mariano the other day, and I was like, "What are we arguing about? Like, what is it all that we're arguing about?" And I'm like, "We're not arguing about commands. We're not arguing about certain management tools and protocols. We're not arguing, you know, over, you know, the owner's responsibilities on stuff, you know." So I said, what is it that we're arguing about? So we kind of just jotted down a couple of our thoughts to try and present this to you guys, to not convince you of anything, because by no means are we authority in pure positive or in balanced dog training, but really it's just to start this conversation and get our brains flowing a little bit on these concepts, because at the end of the day, if we can push the needle forward a little bit, we can help a lot more dogs if we are a little bit more thoughtful of our dog training. All right.
100%.
So here we go. Let's get into where we all agree. So both camps of dog training, where do we both agree? Mariano, shoot.
Well, I think that where we can all agree is that modern dog training in all of its forms has definitely evolved quite significantly over the years. I think that pure positive trainers and balanced trainers alike can look at training footage from 20, 30, 40 years ago and say, yeah, we don't really do that anymore. We know a lot more now. And even when you consider dog training like as a technical skill aside, just the world of dog training is so different. And we've talked about this with like Tyler and Michael Ellis and stuff like that. We kind of liken that to people like Cesar Milan, who was a balanced dog trainer, I guess, you would consider, or a dominant, whatever. But no matter what type of trainer you are, the landscape of dog training overall has been very much changed because of people like him, right? Yeah. Some other things that we can all agree on: the importance of timing in training a dog, making sure that you're very clearly helping the dog understand exactly what you're rewarding for or correcting for. That needs to be understood. Otherwise, there can be no repeatability on the part of the dog. And by that same token, something else we can all agree on: consistency is absolutely key. There's no way around that. I don't even really think I need to explain that one very much. And also, I think we can agree that good dog training is definitely a matter of controlling for variables so that we understand exactly what it is that the dog is struggling with, as opposed to just throwing things at them in some random order and then we don't know what's what.
Yeah, I think just the basic idea of scaffolding in general, like every camp understands some form of scaffolding, right? Make it easy, make it a little harder, make it even a little harder than that. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely some people who think, you see a problem, go towards it and correct it and break it and end it. And, with certain behaviors, it is possible to see results in that scenario, but it's always what we're looking at is the longevity of that behavior. Other things that we are looking at is something we all agree on as dog trainers, is there's certain behaviors we want to incentivize or reward, or we want to create, we want that thing to occur again in the future. So we want to reinforce behaviors, right? And then we want to decentivize unwanted behaviors, right? Or find a way to punish those particular behaviors, right? So reinforcement and punishment, all of these things exist. However, when we get into operant conditioning a little bit later, we're going to see that not both camps use all quadrants of operant conditioning equally, and not all camps use classical conditioning equally, right? So that's definitely something, but we agree that we need to either reinforce or punish certain behaviors. Also, how dogs learn, over the last 15, 20 years, I would say last 15 years, there's been a huge shift in the dog training world, especially with marker systems, right? I don't know the exact history of it, but definitely we know marker training started, way back with aquatic animal training. Karen Pryor came and brought it with clicker training to the dog training world. And then the idea of marking with sounds just became super popularized. And now we are in a generation of voice markers and verbal markers, right? So yes, good, nope, break, all these different things that we use as an actual marker to tell the dog that they're doing something correctly, or to tell the dog that they need to try again, or that they're doing something wrong, right? So I think across the board, balance or positive reinforcement only, or pure positive trainers, they are using marker and marker systems for sure. And I think the very last one that we could come up with is that owner and clients do play a huge role in the ultimate overall outcome and success of the dog, right? Dog trainers on both camps, we can shape behaviors, we can develop behaviors, but the only way that those behaviors stick for the rest of the dog's life is if the owners actually play a huge role in that dog's life in order to make it work. So yeah, those are the things that we agree on.
Absolutely. So with that being said, I think it's worthwhile, and we, Brent and I were trying to figure out how to best present this so that it makes sense to people who are just kind of listening, and for those of you guys who don't know, it is kind of tough presenting an argument like this, or let alone two arguments without like the help of visual aids. So, so just kind of bear with us. So we figured we'd break it down like this. Now that we've talked about what we can all agree on, we're going to go over the ideals of the two different camps of the dog training world and what their argument for their method or against the other method is, and then we'll round it out with what we think it ultimately boils down to. Okay,
Right.
so we'll start with pure positive, and I think.
Well, can I take that one?
Oh, sure, go for it.
Okay, I'll take pure positive. So, a lot of these things on this list, we've either heard these arguments before, or we can actually put ourselves in the shoes of a positive reinforcement or a pure positive trainer, and understand where they're coming from. I think that's the thing. Again, these may not be all the arguments that they have. These are definitely the ones that are the most familiar to us. So I think the very first argument a pure positive trainer would have is what they're using as far as motivation, right? They don't believe in using any type of force or pressure, so therefore they kind of have a force-free mentality, right? Sometimes it can just be as simple as, I'm not going to give a dog a reward to punish a behavior. It could also be as extreme as, I don't even tell the dog no or have any negative markers because I don't want to associate that with the type of work. But yeah, so being force free, no pressure, no corrections, no yelling, no screaming. And I can definitely understand why those are why that happens, because on the other side of the spectrum, as a dog trainer for a while, I've seen people who are too heavy handed, people who are too correction happy, people who are breaking dog spirits, people who are correcting with horrible timing, and it actually confuses the hell out of the dog. So I've definitely seen those things. So I definitely understand force free as an ideal. And so that's one thing that pure positive people believe in for sure. Corrections can cause emotional trauma to dogs. Also, this is definitely a something that again I've seen as a dog trainer, so I definitely understand that that is possible. However, there are also corrections that don't. Right, that's definitely something, my own opinion. But let me stick to the pure positive perspective. Another one would be owners. Owners can't do. Actually, I don't understand this note.
Owners can't do corrections correctly, or at least owners can mess up a correction, which therefore would lend itself to like a misuse of a correction can cause emotional trauma to a dog.
Got it. Okay, that's what you meant. Okay, so this one is, so pretty much corrections can't be, they're not easy to do pretty much. So owners can mess them up, sometimes making things worse. So we'd rather just not use them altogether because it's possible to actually mess things up a little bit more. So I've heard that one before. Let's see. If the dog needs a correction, this is something I've heard before a lot. If the dog actually is in need of a correction, then that means you haven't done enough foundational work or training prior to putting the dog in that situation, right? Which I guess I totally understand that to an extent as well. If I'm putting my dog into a situation where they're constantly failing, well, that means I haven't done enough prep work. So I totally understand that argument for sure. One that I hear a lot that's really funny, or not funny, but just it's an interesting perspective because, again, I've seen this happen, so it's not completely unreasonable. But people who are lazy, right? So many times I get clients that come and they go, that if you use corrections or if you use force, that you're a lazy trainer or that you're a lazy dog owner, right? And I have seen that. I've seen people that they say, my dog's great. He's fine. He doesn't need any training. So I say, what are you calling me for? And they go, well, I just need him to stop lunging at people. And that's the only thing. What tool can I buy that gets him to stop lunging at things? Or what, how many sessions would it take for him to just stop lunging? Right. And so there is kind of this idea that, there's a problem. We can get a tool or we can, get a certain type of training to just fix that problem immediately. But again, it's usually people think that you can kind of extinguish a behavior, and they don't necessarily understand how much work and how many variables go into actually the shaping of certain behaviors. Okay. This is one I hear a lot. Tell me what you think about this, Mariano. Is that if you use corrections in your dog training, that it's not scientific.
Yeah, that's a funny one because I know exactly what pure positive trainers are referring to when and it's all over their marketing, right? Science-based dog training and stuff like that. It's almost synonymous, you would think, like from an advertising perspective, pure positive and science-based dog training.
Mhm.
Um, they're not wrong because there have been scientific studies that clearly suggest, not even suggest, that clearly confirm, I guess is a better word.
Mhm.
There is nothing better, and this is what I say to my clients is there is nothing better for shaping new behaviors than food work or positive, motivational work, right?
Mhm.
Now, there is a caveat to that kind of thing or certain limitations to that kind of thing that I think most dog trainers can understand. Whether they agree with it or not, I think they can at least understand where someone's coming from. But I'll dive into that a little further in the balance training section.
Yeah. Another argument that I've seen with not scientific, right? So in the dog training world, you know, we can look at the balanced dog training spectrum itself has people who are really working really hard every single day to be as close to balance as possible. So this means, in essence, trying to follow the Lima standards, right? Limit,
Least intrusive, minimally aversive.
least intrusive, minimally aversive, right? So this means we don't really use aversive. We use aversives minimally,
Mm-hmm.
and we try and use the least aversive methods so to not cause a lot of stress or pressure to that dog, right? So you have balanced dog trainers who are really dedicated to trying to follow that standard, and then you have balanced dog trainers who are not, right? They work heavily with pressure, and then they use a couple treats here and there, and then there are some that they work heavily with pressure. They just are tired of calling themselves dominance based or pack based or behaviorist, so they just call themselves balanced dog trainers, right?
Right.
uh, Again, there's a broad spectrum of balanced dog trainers. So what tends to happen is when we have such a broad spectrum of practitioners, it's really hard to have any consistent reads on a method or a technique or an idea because everything is contextual. When I give a correction, it's contextual. So it's and certain variables are not being controlled, right? When we start getting into dominance and relationship patterns, it's really hard for us to say, "Oh, the dog did this because he doesn't respect you," right? And when we start making corrections out of quote unquote disrespect, it's really hard to read and measure that data, right? So therefore it's really hard to make it scientific. Now, what is scientific is we do know that dogs learn through pressure, escape and avoidance of pressure, right? It's called negative reinforcement. We definitely know that that works also in a laboratory, and we definitely know that that works in real life, right? But to their point, in a controlled setting, in a repeatable way, we know that pure positive training, motivation work, the acquisition of food or something desirable, is a really great way to shape new behaviors and reinforce those behaviors, right? When we get out of that vacuum of dog training, that's when we kind of see something different, which we'll go into the balanced dog training aspects. Okay. And then another argument that we see with pure positive is we see that, and I've witnessed this in my career, things that have been shaped positively are longer lasting, and the dogs will remember them without the as much need for reinforcement throughout their lives, right? So for example, when my dog was really young, I taught him a flip finish, right? And that flip finish I started from the time that he was 8 weeks old, and I probably conditioned it for the first 4 or 5 months of his life. And he's really good at it, and he got really good at it really, really quick. And everyone who worked with him or saw him would practice it. And honestly, I haven't reinforced a flip finish now for like the last, I would say, 9 months, 10 months with any food. But my
Mm-hmm.
dog still does a flip finish on cue right away because it was developed that way. And he's happy to do it without any motivation, other than maybe just a little pat on the head and a little scratch on his neck. And he does it perfectly, right? But I no longer have to reward it with food. So these are some of the pure positive arguments that we've seen, in the industry and through some of the people that we know and conversations that we've had. Um, I personally, I don't necessarily say that any of these arguments are completely wrong. Okay. Again, context is king. Context is the most important thing here. When we're dog trainers, we have to look at all the variables put together, and we have to make the right decisions based on those variables. All right. Want to take away the next section?
Sure. So now that we've broken down pure positive training and the arguments therein for it or against balanced training, we're going to do the same thing with balanced training. So here are some of the arguments laid out as we've heard them from balanced dog trainers. Balanced dog trainers, as opposed to being, force-free, they just believe in being results-based, meaning if it's ultimately what helps the dog, then I'm going to do it because I'm out to just make sure that this dog no longer lunges or jumps or whatever the case, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever that looks like, within reason anyway, I hope. So another argument would be it's faster and therefore potentially cheaper. And what I mean by that, and there's an interesting, part of that I'll dive into right at the end of this here. But what I mean by that is faster. I've definitely seen online, read about, and heard of, like personally, someone who, my dog has this issue, and this issue. I've met this many trainers, and we've done like 8-9 sessions together, and the dog just didn't get that much better. I saw improvement, but ultimately it was just, just didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Whereas a balanced training method has the potential to knock out these unwanted behaviors quickly. Mm-hmm. And because it's faster, because there are less sessions, naturally it's cheaper, right? Mm-hmm. If you guys charge $150 a lesson, regardless of the type of training method, and one takes 5 and one takes 10, the one that takes 5 is the cheaper method. Now, another argument is when you're working with training tools, at the end of the day, you have more control of your dog. If I've got an e-collar on my dog and someone else has their other dog with no sort of tool and they're both off leash, my dog has a direct line to me, whereas their dog does not. I mean, of course, they can talk to them and otherwise incentivize them with, all the different types of luring behaviors and hey, come here. And, but I have something that serves as an extra reinforcer.
Pure positive trainers aren't really having their dog off leash all the time either.
No, of course not. Well, neither are balanced dog trainers, but and that's a good point to mention. I'm just saying, like, at the end of the day, this is an argument that they utilize, whether or not it's necessarily, because I agree with you that none of these are necessarily 100% wrong. But if we're keeping it real, none of these are 100% right, and I think that goes for either one. Right. So me personally, as a quote unquote balanced trainer, in that I do use aversive tools as well as food work with my training clients. Mm-hmm. If I heard another balanced trainer present that as an argument, I'd be like, yeah, but really, who cares? Like, of all the dogs that I train, almost nobody really needs their dog to be like off leash reliable 1,000% of the time, Mm-hmm. And it's illegal anyway to take your dog off leash anyway, unless you're like at a dog park or something, So ultimately, that's the argument, though, is like at the end of the day, the whole ifs and
more control overall.
Correct, right? Like, should I need it? I have it. That's the argument, right? Yeah. Another one,
a pure positive would argue, why are you being a control freak?
Right?
Why do you need so much control?
Right. And it's not a ridiculous question, but I think that the clear answer, as I've understood it from other positive trainers, is for safety. Mm-hmm. So another argument then would be using certain tools can make things a lot easier for a client or owner. And I think of examples that just today I met with a dog. He's a pity, he's a rescue, sweet boy and everything, but man, that dog can pull. And when he sees other dogs or people, he gets very lungy, and that dog is strong, mm-hmm. And so we've talked about, the type of, we're going to do some lessons, and we've talked about what the process is going to look like going forward. And there will be food work in there. In fact, that'll be first, in the shaping process. But ultimately, I was explaining to them that, you guys would have such an easier time and such a safer time, frankly, because that's a pretty strong dog there.
Right.
Working with a certain tool that would help you mitigate this dog's ability to do these things. Right. So another argument then would be balanced dog trainers consider their methods, their outlook on training as more realistic versus idealistic, in that they understand where you're coming from. Like, I get it. You don't want to punish a dog. I can appreciate that. But, and I'm speaking as like a typical balanced trainer, right? So I get it, but ultimately the goal is fix this problem. right? So with that in mind, I'm going to fix the problem, whatever that looks like. I'm not really the argument that's a little more compelling than that I think that I've heard is I'm not going to worry so much about like, is it mean, or whatever the case to use like a prong collar, a star mark collar, a electric collar, because it's not nearly as mean to correct a dog as, animal control is going to be to my dog when he bites somebody.
Right.
So that's definitely an argument that I've heard. Here's an argument that's kind of more balanced, more pro balanced as opposed to anti pure positive is balanced dog trainers use a wider skill set in that a good balanced dog trainer, and that's something that I wanted to kind of touch on because you were talking about pure positive stuff and you kind of came into the understandings of like the scientific understandings and like how technically speaking pressure avoidance is science based. It is backed by evidence, right?
Right.
Now I do want to try to paint this if we can to balanced dog trainers. I'm kind of looking at this as balanced dog trainers who know their stuff, because
Right.
you're absolutely right that not only balanced dog training, but I think pure positive too, have become such kind of wide, all encompassing. Like we've talked about this before. I've met a pure positive trainer who doesn't even think you should crate your dog or even say the word no at all, which is like, it's just weird to me because, if no has no context to a dog unless you build it, I don't even understand how you see that as negative, or whatever the case. But balanced dog trainers definitely have that same issue where they're too firm or they're too emotional or they're too, those crazy outliers, they do exist.
They're not emotional, that's something too.
Right. But you know what I mean? Like too emotional as in they're like, don't let this dog pull one over on you, correct the dog to make a point type thing, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And those do exist. I don't think that they're necessarily super duper mainstream or popular, but they do exist. So we have to bring that up. And with that being said, I'm speaking to more balanced dog trainers who are actually balanced, who understand the value of food, but also use other tools. And they believe in the value of using more tools because in their heads, it's like, well, hey man, you're a rewards-based trainer. So am I. I just have other things on top of that make me more versatile than you or make me more like reliable than you because I can shape behaviors just like you, but then I can start correcting for unwanted behaviors, which is something you can't really do that well. Mm-hmm. The final argument that I wanted to touch on is they meaning balanced dog trainers see it as a much safer alternative. They can mitigate risk a lot better.
Yeah.
I kind of touch on that with that same example of that pity or similar dogs who I'm like, yeah, man, maybe this dog would be good with the remote collar because you have control in the house or, off of a leash and whatever the case. I think that this still somewhat ties into the timing of training or how long it's going to take and how much money and everything else, because if you've got something that you can condition more quickly, it's like, how long do you want this bitey dog to be potentially bitey? Because each and every day that goes on, the potential for risk remains there. So that's always been one is I'm willing to use tools that can slow down the dog as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, and as reliably as possible. And in that sort of like headspace, they believe that they are the most risk averse, which is why I see personally, I could be totally wrong. And if I am, please let us know. I'd love your input on this. And you too, Brent, if I'm wrong. Yeah. Whenever I see people work consistently with dogs with issues, they tend to be more balanced trainers. I don't really see too many pure positive people like on YouTube and stuff like that working with dogs with severe issues.
True. Yeah. And the one, well, because it's a very slow process, right? It's
right.
I took a course. Ian Dunbar had his growl class, and it's a very lengthy course, and I'm very happy I took it because it definitely taught me a lot about some classical conditioning, redirection techniques, repetition, a lot of cool things. Really awesome course. It's on Udemy. .com. But yeah, it's I would say it's kind of like baseball where it like moves really slow. So maybe it's not good for clicks. It's not
right.
Good for entertainment. It's not good. You don't see those night and day transformations like you would when using other tools, other aversives. Yeah, so I agree. I agree that you don't see a lot of that stuff on YouTube, but I definitely have seen full-fledged systems, and I have seen progress. Is it as quick and as progressive as, let's say, the use of a balanced approach? No, not at all. Not at all. But I definitely have pulled value from watching those.
You bring up a very interesting point with that. And I think just before we dive into
Mhm.
what the major differences ultimately are as we see them, just our version of just boiling this down to what really we're talking about here, right?
Uh,
But before we do that, I wanted to bring this up because that's an excellent point. Balanced dog trainers, I think, are a little more in depth, like as an ideal. I'm not saying that they're like better or correct, but they try to be more like analytical in their videos. They're like longer. They deal with dogs with more serious issues.
mhm.
Um, Whereas pure positive trainers, and I consider this an absolute pro, right? Is there's just super marketable and it is definitely upbeat and I think that that's cool. I'm not saying that to be like flippant, like I really think that that is a good thing, which I think is pretty obvious in just how dominant pure positive training is in like YouTube and stuff like that. The last
Right.
time I checked, Zach George is still the king of dog training on YouTube. He had like 14 million subscribers. That was the last time I checked.
Mhm.
It's been a while. And I get it. Honestly, I get it. He's a pure positive trainer. Um, he explained things very well. His videos have like a kind of upbeat. It's almost like a TV show. Yeah, and I know he's done TV shows for Discovery Channel, right? Or
Yeah.
or Animal Planet.
Yeah.
Um, and I can respect that. I can respect that they kind of stick to their strengths and that like, okay, I'm not necessarily going to go through a whole beginning to end process of how do I use only food to redirect aggression with this dog and get them to not be so leash reactive, but I will make a bunch of 5 to 7 minute videos on like how to get your puppy to go in and out of the crate, how to work sit, how to work down. And I think that there's a market for that, just like there's a market for reactivity and other stuff. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, the differences I see it in marketability.
Mhm.
Um, and give everybody their respected, credit. But yeah, with that being said, I think it's worth, now we can start diving into the major differences, and I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah.
So go for it.
So yeah, when we first started just kind of contemplating this subject, I was like, I'm pretty confident there's not that many things people argue over, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of things we argue, that we agree upon, in dog training. The goals are the same, the commands are relatively the same. The end result is relatively the same. So we kind of just came up with a handful of a very small list of things that um, what the major big differences are. And I think we've touched base on them, but we're just going to put them into categories, right? I think the very first one is um, we're looking at what we're using to shape or modify behaviors, right? Are we using incentives that the dog wants, or are we using something that the dog wants to escape or avoid, right? Are we using rewards or are we using pressure work? Right. These are the one big thing that we argue on, even amongst the realm of balanced dog trainers.
Mm-hmm.
People who call themselves balanced dog trainers will disagree on stuff at some point. No, you're using too much pressure here, or no, you're not using enough pressure there. And they'll disagree. Or you're using too much food, you're not using enough food, you're not phasing out properly. They're going to disagree on a bunch of shit, right? There's actually that shirt. Actually, I'm going to order it. It says the only thing two dog trainers have in common or can agree upon is how bad the third one is. So I think
Right.
it's pretty funny. So there's that, and then I'm sure that same disagreement happens also in reward based trainers, but I think that's more of like a technical issue, right? Like if you're not rewarding enough, or your reward schedule is off, or your timing is off, those are more technical things. Versus with corrections, it's a little bit more detrimental, I think. But anyways, so those are the things that the two camps are really arguing on. Are we using rewards? Are we using corrections? And to what extent are we using correction? This is everybody in dog training
Can we
agrees.
break this particular, you know, topic down a little bit further and talk some about the four quadrants of the operant conditioning?
Sure,
Like,
sure, for sure. So real quick, we'll recap operant conditioning. I'll also recap some classical conditioning too. I think that might be helpful. But positive reinforcement, we are adding something desirable to reinforce a dog's behavior. Right? Super simple.
mhm.
Positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is we are applying something undesirable to the dog to give them the option to either escape or avoid that pressure from staying on or reoccurring, right? So that's negative
Sorry,
reinforcement.
I don't mean to dive in. That's positive punisher. I
No.
think negative reinforcing is taking away something that the dog would
Yeah,
like.
yeah, yeah. Negative reinforcement. Yeah, it's still part of the escape and avoidance is still part of negative reinforcement. Positive punishment is to eliminate behaviors. Um, so I'll clarify that for everybody. So negative reinforcement is escaping or avoiding things, right? So escaping or avoiding consequences. Punishments are used to eliminate behaviors altogether. So it's one is more adaptive and one is more corrective. So like positive punishment is I want to correct a behavior, I want it to go away all the time, right? Versus like if I block certain, let's say a negative reinforcement, I don't want the dog to go left. Well, I'm going to apply pressure when the dog goes left. So now the dog can only go straight and right. So the dog has to adapt, but it's still moving. We're not stopping the dog from moving or walking or doing anything like that. The dog is learning to escape or avoid pressure based on a decision that he's making. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm confused because as soon as you said the words apply pressure, to me that says positive punisher. You're applying pressure. Like in my head, it was a
Yeah. So
positive reinforcer is you're applying a reinforcer. You're giving food, let's say. A negative reinforcer meaning you're taking away something that the dog wants. Whereas a positive punisher is you're now applying pressure. You're adding pressure where there wasn't any, which is why it's a positive punisher,
yeah.
um, in order
So
to achieve a different outcome.
yeah. So in negative reinforcement, the environment is already applying pressure or has the potential to apply pressure. So, for example, technically, when I pull up on a leash with a choke chain or a pinch collar, I'm applying pressure, right? With the hopes that the dog learns to escape that pressure by sitting down. So the pressure just doesn't automatically always. In some situations, it does automatically exist, but it has to be turned on, and the dog has to learn how to escape or avoid that pressure altogether. And that's ultimately what negative reinforcement is, right? Punishment is a very different thing. I want one example I always give because this is a very confusing thing for a lot of people. So one example is this: if I touch a hot stove, what happens?
Yeah, you burn your hand.
You burn your hand. Okay. So if burning my hand was a punishment, right, then I would never cook ever again in my life because I burned my hand once and I'm never fucking doing that ever again. So I would get punished for cooking, right? But what I end up learning is because I need to cook, because I want to cook, because, it wasn't that detrimental where I avoided cooking altogether. What ends up happening when I burn my hand, I'm adaptive. I end up just figuring out how not to get burned again next time I'm by the stove. But I keep cooking and I'm going to adapt to it. Does that make sense? So one is a little bit more adaptive versus the other one is more eliminating a behavior.
Yeah, I get that. I think the difference in my head is the stove isn't correcting you, it's just hot. That'd be like a dog, that'd be like my dog running into the glass door. That's not me correcting him, he's just ran into the glass door, versus me telling him don't do that.
Right. And the stove, but the pressure was already existed. The pressure was applied. I touched the thing and I felt pressure or I felt something undesirable. And now I have to alter my behavior based on that. But the stove, as you mentioned, the stove wasn't trying to stop a behavior from me.
Right. I'm looking at things in terms of as a positive punisher, if you're the one adding pressure, that would be like you touching the hot stove and then getting yelled at for touching the hot stove. That's adding pressure.
Yes.
So like
In dog training, we tend to add pressure with the intention of escaping it. So when you
right.
turn on the e-collar and you hold the button down, you're adding pressure, correct?
Correct.
And when the dog turns it off by walking towards you, the dog is now escaping pressure. That's negative reinforcement. That's not a correction.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think that's right. I mean, I'll look it up later, but it's okay. Go ahead, continue.
Anyways, we'll go over it. All right. So we have positive reinforcement, which is we're giving the dog something desirable to reinforce a behavior to make sure that that behavior occurs again in the future. We have negative reinforcement where our dogs learn to escape pressure and by escaping pressure, whatever behavior it is that they did to escape pressure gets reinforced because it got rid of the pressure, right? So they learn to do that behavior again if they feel that pressure occur again in the future, right? Or that consequence happening. Positive punishment is the application. We're adding something undesirable to the dog to try and make sure that behavior does not happen again in the future, right? And then we have the last one, which is called negative punishment, which is we're actually removing something that the dog likes that's desirable in order to punish a behavior. We call that the penalty rule, right? I take something away as a penalty because you did something that was undesirable. So I'm controlling that behavior that way. All right. So we have these 4 areas of operant conditioning. And then the second thing I wanted to talk about was classical conditioning, which is ultimately how our dogs make associations, be them sounds or they associate emotion to things that at one point didn't have any meaning to them, right? And so this could be, you can get a dog who is scared of, or who might be scared of something. Let's say, or let's look at a basic one that we deal with, like a bed command, right? When we teach bed command, especially we teach it with lots of food, right? We can teach the dog that going to bed is a highly rewarding process, therefore making the dog feel good when he's on the bed. And naturally, over time, the dog actually starts, anytime the dog wants to feel good, they actually go to bed, right? Another one would be a negative example would be like classically conditioning the crate, right? If we want the crate to be a positive place for the dog, we make sure a lot of positive things happen within the crate. Eating, chewing, treats, rewards, training, all these different positive things happen within the crate. So that way the dog doesn't have any negative vibes towards that crate itself. So that's classical conditioning as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think of the major difference being how you directly teach a dog versus how a dog just kind of learns something, right? Like kind of back to the example of touching a hot stove. Like an example that I thought was funny was in my old apartment, I used to throw a tennis ball for my dogs. And my bigger dogs are absolute like klutzes and they run into things, And one time my dog River ran into my guitar,
Wow.
and it of course went clong, and all the strings made their noise. And he was like, no, and he wouldn't go near it anymore. It wasn't something I wanted him to be afraid of. I didn't mean to throw the ball that close to it or anything like that. And I didn't add any sort of punisher for like, hey, don't run into my guitar.
Right.
I just kind of went back, put it back on its little stand, and but he learned pretty quick he doesn't like it. Even to the point where if I pick it up just because I want to play it, he'll leave me.
Yeah, he gets scared of it.
Yeah,
he associated it with something bad.
Right. It freaked him out.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. The second thing that most major differences between all dog trainers, what we see, is what are acceptable tools to train with, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have people on one side of the spectrum, again, who don't want to use any aversive tools, which I get it. They want to use marker systems. They want to use voice. They want to use targets. They want to use these things that again have to be taught and trained, versus teaching our dogs with aversive tools where they learn to escape or avoid consequences, right?
Right. Can I toss this in there real quick, just to add some subtext to this, so people can have a little extra to chew on? I have met trainers who refer to themselves as peer positive, who do leash corrections, but they don't use like tools. Like they'll use like slip leads and martingales and stuff like that. But of course, no prong collar, star marquee collar, but they do leash correct dogs. And for that reason, I think that it's very important to make this delineation, because I wouldn't want someone to listen to that and be like, well, duh, tools, because you'd be amazed, like we talked about, there is a lot of wiggle room in either one of these like ideals when it comes to training dogs. There's a million balanced dog trainers who are anti e-collar, right? There's all kinds of variation there. And there's a lot of pure positive trainers who do correct dogs, just not with what they consider to be like cruel or aversive methods.
Tools. Yeah, 100%. And I would say, there are, and on the other side of that spectrum, there are balanced dog trainers who only use specific types of tools.
Correct.
Right? They only use a prong, or they only use an E. They never use a choke, a martingale, a slip lead, or anything like that. And yeah, it's interesting because even one of the greats, Ian Dunbar, who's definitely I don't want to say he's pure positive 100%, but he's definitely paved the way for a lot of pure positive dog trainers. I remember seeing some videos from back in the 80s that he was giving dogs corrections. Yep, but not on a choke chain or anything, but he was giving dogs corrections. So I totally agree with that.
Right.
Let's see what else we got. How the time that it should take to condition and train your dog. I think this is something that we see as a huge difference, right?
Yeah. Can I touch on this really quick?
Yeah.
Is here was one that you kind of outlined in a way that I thought was really helpful. Because when we originally wrote this down, time it takes to condition, we wrote it down to mean this. Largely, we feel that balanced dog trainers are very much about like, hey, 3-4 week board and train program. And we're seeing kind of the whole like 2 week thing and all that stuff now. And it's very much like, I can knock this out in X amount of lessons. I can knock this out in X amount of weeks. Whereas a lot of balanced dog trainers are like, hey, what's your rush? Isn't it more important to teach this the right way? Isn't it more important to make sure that your dog has fun?
Balanced or purely positive?
That's purely positive. The who's not in a rush. The balanced people are more like, hey, we can do this like quickly, And so that's kind of the big disconnect as I see it. But what I wanted to touch on before I let you kind of riff is the extra bit that you laid out that I thought was extremely important was, it is absolutely a good point when we're talking about time it takes to condition, is we also have to consider how long that conditioning lasts. That factors in too, right? If I bought a cell phone for $200 and it's going to last me 10 years, it's a better buy than a $100 cell phone that's going to last me 1 year, right? So I think that factors in. So ultimately, it seems like the major agreement is balanced dog trainers believe in getting it done quickly. Pure positive trainers believe in getting it done the right way. And the science does show that more reward-based conditioning tends to hold up longer. But then again, if you have a way to correct, you can always correct, So it's an interesting one, but go ahead. I want to hear your take on this as well.
Yeah, I think time it takes to condition. Definitely, I think one of the big differences, positive dog training does take longer time because you have to develop things in its component pieces, like one sliver and layer at a time. What I've seen when I've done a lot of positive work is, it's a slow process until it clicks on the dog. When something clicks on the dog and the dog goes, oh, that's how I get the thing that I wanted. Now we start seeing kind of like a leap forward, this quantum leap forward in some of our work. But sometimes that takes weeks. Could take days. It could take weeks. It could take just a number of sessions. It really depends on the dog and what the behavior is we're trying to train. But yeah, ultimately, positive reinforcement training does take longer when dealing with certain types of issues. It definitely doesn't take longer when teaching a sit or a down or a stay or anything like that. Not at all. But when we're starting dealing with like behavior mod, or we're starting to deal with, kind of what's it called? Dealing with distractions in general.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we have to be very. That's where I think the clash is when we start dealing with distraction work, because I would say the fastest way to teach sitting down and heel and stuff like that, totally food work, right? Totally food work. How do I teach a dog not to pull? Well, aversives, like that's
Right.
going to be a little bit easier to teach our dogs what not to do when we are using aversives versus just trying to rely on motivation and timing. Again, easier, and the time to conditioning. Balanced dog training tends to be a little bit more expedited, right? Because we're using tools and we're using some aversive. So is that the point? That's what you were talking about?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it was perfect no matter what, because I wanted to hear you riff on it anyway. But yeah, you touched on that beautifully, and I think that you jogged my memory. I want to say it was Sean O'Shea who I heard say this. And you tell me if you agree or disagree. Sean O'Shea made this point. I think it was in his first book, and I believe his second book. I saw him post that it just got finished, so it should be out soon if it's not out already. If I'm wrong about that, sorry, bro. But in the first book, he talked about the difference between food versus like a corrective method, and the way he broke it down in simple terms, because he's really good at that, is food is an excellent way to, what it does, it motivates, and it creates a lot of things, excitement and focus and energy and so on, all of which are very valuable things in dog training. But if the goal is to get less of something, not more, it's hard to get less of something with food.
Mm,
And that's kind of the delineation he drew. Like, I can get sits all day long with food. I can't get less, jumping on me or less whatever with rewards, because of course the dog jumps on you and you go no, and the dog sits down and you reward him, good boy, and they go, oh, I'm a good boy, I get food, boom, and they jump again because they're excited, and uh,
yeah.
and certainly that's not like a 100% solid rule, but I thought that he worded that nicely.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, that the general strategy would be, I want to develop and condition a desire and obsession in the dog so that I could undo that bad behavior, or I could use
Right.
it against that bad behavior, which makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about cost of training, and I think that this can be a multifaceted approach. Maybe we talked about it a little bit already, but I just want to touch on it, one good time, since we're breaking down like the major differences as we see them. That
Right.
cost of training, of course, being like money cost, right? If one takes longer, then it costs more because it took longer, and the trainer's time is worth whatever they, charge for their time.
Mhm.
But also, I think factored into cost, I'm going to argue on behalf of both sides there, and then I'll let you kind of take it away. Is
Mhm.
the balanced dog trainer would say, hey man, money aside, I can do this in less time. Time is an invaluable resource that you cannot get back. That's cost.
Right.
They would also say, I can button this down quickly. I can mitigate risk. Like, how do you put a price on making your dog safer sooner?
Mhm.
Whereas the pure positive trainer would argue, yeah, you can get it done that way, but at what cost to your dog and your relationship and, and their emotion and everything else. And I think that there's some solid points on either side. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out and let you go ahead and take it away.
Yeah. So, to what cost are we picking stuff? Again, this is all context. Context is the most important thing. This is where it's really the decision of the dog owner itself, right? Because they are the ones that are in essence are paying in both their time and money.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that really have to weigh out what their values and what's important to them at any given time. Again, when we're dealing with really high risk situations, I would like to think that most dog trainers are on the same page as far as safety protocols, right? Muzzles, certain types of leashes, just making, avoidance of certain things for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but definitely we start seeing that, um, certain approaches in dog training offer, uh, you know, different costs, right? And if I was a positive reinforcement only trainer, which I do a lot of positive work, I do a lot of, food based, what's it called, behavior mod. I do a lot of, I definitely understand it, but I also understand where a correction comes in. It's really heavy on the time. It's really heavy on the time, and sometimes certain methods in positive reinforcement, as there are certain methods in balance training, um, can the other question I have to ask myself is, can the owners do these things consistently? Do they have the time to do it? Do they have the personality to do this? Do they have the schedule or the organizational skills to actually do these things in general? And based on those things, I also have to choose what my approach could be,
Mm-hmm.
right? Should be, right? If I do have a person who wants to put in the work and they want a specific outcome, I might do, 10 to 15 private sessions with that person. If I have a person who's very high risk, um, I might do 10 to 15 positive, pure positive or mostly positive work with that person. If I have a dog who is high risk, if I have an owner who doesn't have a lot of time, if I have an owner who doesn't have a lot of money, but our cumulative goal is, how can we keep this dog safe? How can we keep the public safe? How can we make sure that the owner, is feeling more secure and has a better management system? Then we will probably be going more towards balanced dog training style
Mm-hmm.
work, right? And so yeah, so we kind of have to look at also the owner as well, and they're also going to be the ones that are deciding what the cost, to what cost, right?
Right. Can I say on a personal level,
Yeah.
um, I personally find that particular piece of the puzzle, the owner, to be like my single biggest reason for being a balanced dog trainer as opposed to pure positive, because I try to be realistic in their own limitations and their own capabilities, and um, it's an interesting one because this makes me think of Ian Dunbar, right? Dr. Ian Dunbar, who he says, I've got his quote up here. It's, "To use a shock collar as an effective dog training method, you will need a thorough understanding of canine behavior, a thorough understanding of learning theory, and impeccable timing. And if you have those three things, you don't need a shock collar," right? And do I believe that Dr. Ian Dunbar himself can train a lot of reactive dogs or otherwise, difficult dogs himself? Yes. Do I believe that he can do all this masterful work and then give these dogs back to clients and them continue this? Not necessarily, not to the same extent. And that's where tools, I think, really come into their own. Is you've got to be practical about these things, and you've got to understand, like again, it's the whole realistic versus idealistic. It's like, yeah, should you? Maybe, and could you? Maybe, yeah, like possibly. Could I be 190 pounds of lean muscle? Yeah, probably. But is it like realistic for me to do it? No, So, I do think that that's definitely, in my opinion, the single biggest reason that I choose to be a balanced dog trainer.
Yeah, I mean, the diversity is really important. However, I think there is always a lot more. This turns into politics, right? These are the politics of dog training. I think there's a lot more that balanced dog trainers do need to understand about the positive reinforcement spectrum of dog training, about how classical conditioning works, about behavior mod using food and motivators and things like that, to use those more as a tool, because I think there's such immediate gratification when using certain types of tools in dog training, whether in food being one of them, mind you, right? I can feel so cocky as a dog trainer. If I have a cookie in my hand, I can get the dog to do whatever the hell I want. The same way I can feel so cocky if I have a pinch collar or an e-collar on my dog, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I feel so secure that I can get a behavior out of them. But I really feel, and again, this is something for this podcast, I really feel that it's important, and it's our duty as the host of this podcast. I really want to invite some of these positive reinforcement trainers on to help educate our listeners, because you know what, man, like we all have the same goal. We all want to help dogs. We all want to really, really be better. We want to be more technical. We want to be more precise. Everyone wants to do those things. And I think the only way that we'll ever get to do that is if we actually get to listen to each other and learn what everyone has to teach. So we are reaching out to a handful of positive only trainers, so that we can kind of get their take on this type of work. So that we can understand the arguments and understand the context which things work. I think unless we actually want to hear someone explain themselves all the way through, we'll never fully understand their point of view or their side, and that doesn't help us with growth, right? I think it's really important that we sit down and we talk to people who think different than us. And that we try and understand their points, so that we can add those tools and that common sense and that wisdom to our repertoire. Because there may be a dog, maybe not today, maybe not next week, maybe not this year, but there will be a dog at some point. You're going to go, fuck, I'm so glad I listened to this person, because now I have an approach that I can work on with this dog.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that enough. That food work, pure positive work has innumerable benefit. This is me speaking as a balanced dog trainer, that upping my like motivational based game has really transformed the progress and the process that I've had with board and trained dogs, private lesson clients. The overall kind of look and feel of how your package of lessons goes with clients, like how the whole training arc kind of goes with its ups and downs,
and how the dog looks too.
Exactly, how the dog looks too. Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely so much benefit to working with reinforcing and positive method and stuff like that. I don't want to downplay that at all. I don't want to sound like we're picking sides. I mean, I personally have my beliefs. I know you do too, but yeah. This is the Dog Trainers Podcast because it's for you guys, and we want you guys to have that opportunity to hear these discussions and learn how to listen. It's kind of hard for people to do these days, I think. And again, please help us reach out to positive trainers. We're doing it too, so again, I can't stress this enough that there is a lot of work that goes into this stuff that you guys don't always get to hear about because it just doesn't shake out for one reason or another. But we're always reaching out to people, always trying to see how we can continue to add value to you. And we're just asking for a little bit of help, throw some names at us or invite them on our behalf and kind of put us in touch one way or another. And, let's see what we can do. We all just want training to continue to improve so that dogs get better, faster, and, less, or more efficiently, I should say, and just kind of push this thing on.
Yeah. Well, I love it, man. I love it. We have some cool people coming up in the next couple of episodes, guys. So stay tuned. Really excited about that. Again, this was just more of us wanting to understand what these friction points were. Let's open up our minds a little bit to, maybe having conversations and understanding, maybe exploring different ideologies in dog training, and really get to understand those arguments. So that way we can become better all together. Again, my name is Brent LaBrada, and that guy over there is Mariano Alvarez. If you guys really liked this episode or you thought that it was helpful or that it could help someone, please do us a favor and share it with at least one other person. Again, you guys can find us on all major podcast platforms. Go ahead and check us out on Instagram at DOGTRAINERSPODCAST, and on Facebook as well. Again, this is episode 33, The Major Disagreement, Pure Positive versus Balanced Dog Training. And we can't wait to see you guys in episode 34. All right. We love you guys so much. You guys have a great rest of your week. Peace. Take care.
Take care. Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
We really hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we hope to see you back for the next one. But in the meantime, please follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Dog Trainers Podcast. Go ahead and leave a comment. Ask us any questions that you want. We would love to connect with our dog trainer communities all around the world. Take care, guys. We'll see you next time.